This episode of the Focus Action Results podcast is brought to you by Accelerate Performance, creators of the Focus Action Results course and the FAR Planner. Welcome to the podcast that promises you'll be much more productive with me, your host, Ralph Varcoe. Hello, and today we're going to talk about NLP. What is NLP? So you may have heard of NLP in terms of artificial intelligence. It's a big thing at the moment, lots of AI stuff happening out there, amazing stuff, and they talk about NLP. And in the context of AI, that means natural language processing. So they effectively, a computer can ingest the language, people talking and writing and all that kind of stuff, and make sense of it, and then be able to use that for various things. That is not what we're talking about here. So when I talk about NLP, I mean, wait for it, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. What? Neuro-Linguistic Programming? Well, that's a bit of a mouthful. So what is it? Let's have a definition of what NLP is. Let's break it down. So neuro, this is the study of the mind. It's a study of the nervous system, basically how we think, through which we experience and we process those experiences, and how we represent the outside world to ourselves via our five senses. And what are those five senses? They are visual, auditory, kinesthetic, that means feelings, there's olfactory, smell, and then gustatory, which is to taste. The three most prevalent of those are visual, auditory and kinesthetic, and we tend to represent memories in those three areas mostly. Smells can be quite evocative, tastes can be quite evocative, but we don't tend to store our processes and our memories a great deal in those two. So when we talk about the neuro part of neuro-linguistic programming, we are mostly talking about the representational systems around the way you see things, the way you hear them, and the way that you feel them. Okay, so that's the neuro bit. Then there's linguistic. What's that all about? Well, it's the study of language and how we use that language. Language and other non-verbal communication systems through which our neural representations are coded, ordered, and given meaning. So those can be things like feelings, sounds, pictures, tastes, smells, and those are the words that are associated with those things. All right, so you can think about it. There are certain words which relate to seeing things, like, oh, I see what you mean, or I hear what you say, would be relative to your auditory sense. Oh, I feel you. Okay, you know what I mean. So yeah, that can mean a couple of things. We won't go there. We don't have Francois on the show today, so we shan't be having anything inappropriate or French. But you get what I mean there. So that's the use of language, right? And then the piece which is programming, so neuro-linguistic programming. The programming bit is around how we sequence that. So when you talk about computer programming, you are programming a sequence of events in a particular programming language, and you are able to put those in a particular sequence, which means that things then happen. Well, it's no different to the human brain. Think about this. When we were born, we didn't have any experiences. So before we were conceived, we didn't exist. No experiences at all. As we grow and develop in the womb, we gain some kind of experience, and then as we're born, we become conscious of the world, and we start to grow and to develop. And as we do that, we gain experiences. We learn stuff, we see stuff, we hear it, we feel it. Can we feel the love from our parents, siblings? Do we understand things as we're taught them by family and friends and obviously parents and teachers at school? And then we see things as well. We see it in the media, on the news, in real life, and we copy those things and we gain experiences. And so as we do that, we go from being a pretty much blank canvas to having impressions of how things are. We learn that, we see that, we build up a perspective, we program, we sequence those. We sequence all of those things in our brains. and we sequence them through feelings, through the way that we do things in terms of our mind and memory and stuff like that. And we also do that in terms of the language that we use. And then we program those, and we've got those sorts of feelings and thoughts, etc. there, right? So we're not blank canvases. We basically sequence those into thought patterns, right? So programming, if we have been programmed throughout our childhood, and in fact the entirety of us living until today, it means that we can program ourselves to do things in a different way, right? We are infinitely capable of learning, of being able to do things differently. Okay, so what we can do through neuro-linguistic programming is we can work out how to motivate ourselves, how to sequence things so that we can achieve our goals, right? The ability to discover and utilize programs that we run, our communication to ourselves and others, in our neurological systems that achieve our specific and desired outcomes. So, NLP is how to use the language of the mind to consistently achieve our specific desired outcomes. Okay, so we have infinite ability to be able to do that. So if you think you're stuck in a pattern, you're stuck in a rut, well, you can change that. And NLP is a really effective way of being able to do that. The question is, how? So one of the creators of NLP, there were 3 creators. Most people talk about there being just 2. They talk about Richard Bandler and John Grinder. Those are the 2 famous ones, written lots of books about it, and effectively started the movement. But there was another person as well, a third person called Frank Puslik. And Frank kind of disappeared into ignominy for about 30 years. A bit of a falling out, things changed for Frank, and there is even a story, I think, that Frank and his wife had some kind of a divergence. There may have been some involvement by Richard Bandler in that. It's a story I've heard, no idea if it's true, so no lawsuits, please. Anyway, there were the 3 of them. They created this, and one of the creators basically said that NLP can be defined as an attitude and methodology that leaves a trail of techniques. So an attitude, we've talked about attitude before. I mentioned it in my book Accelerate Personal Performance, about choosing the right attitude that you need to have to be able to achieve the things that you want to achieve. I talk about it in the Focus Action Results course and elsewhere. And it's about an attitude to having curiosity about everything that you possibly can, the ability and the curiosity to experiment. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a moment as we go through how NLP came to being and what are the different elements that got pulled together into this set of techniques. Okay, so then it's about a methodology. So what is that methodology? Well, the first and the most important thing is what they call modelling, right? So that's not Vogue Williams type of modelling. That's an interesting name. I was reading something. So Vogue Williams, people think that was never her name, that she changed it because she became a model. They kind of think her name is actually Joanne, and she just decided to change it. Actually, she was born and given that name by her parents. So I wonder what they wanted her to become. Anyway, she became a model, but that's a different type of modelling, okay? This is the modelling of techniques, of things that work, right? So let's just look at that for a second. If you want to learn to, I don't know, cut somebody's hair, do you, A, go and find the 5-year-old who's just discovered a pair of scissors and goes chop, chop, chop and makes an absolute hash of cutting their brother or sister's hair? Or do you go to the best hairdresser in the world to learn how to do it properly? Well, the answer should be obvious. You go to the best hairdresser in the world, you learn how to do it properly. The same applies to everything in life, right? If you want to be really good at something, find the person who's the best at it and learn from them. Okay, that's why companies hire consultants. Consultants who are experts in their field. They've done it before, 100 times before, so they know what they're talking about and they can actually make an impact and a change. You go to see a teacher or a specialist in a particular subject when you go to university, right? If you are reading geography, you go to the geography specialist who's going to teach you all about geography. You don't go to the art historian because they don't know anything about geography, right? So it's all about finding the right people who know the most or the best and then doing what they do to be as good as you can be. So it's about modeling excellence. So you effectively find the tools, the techniques, the things that work, then work out how to do those, how to replicate those, how to string them together. And then that's the third bit, a trail of techniques, right? So you put all of those together into a trail of techniques, things that can be used, can be replicated time after time, so that people can learn to be different. And I mean learn subconsciously as well as consciously. But actually there's an awful lot of stuff in NLP that happens subconsciously, all right? Subconscious part of you is much bigger than the conscious part. It's the bit that stores the memories. It's the bit that stores the patterns that you have learned. It stores the decisions you've made about yourself at some point in time. Go back to the limiting beliefs, the limiting decisions podcast that you will have listened to earlier in the season, right? So those decisions you've made, and you park those in your subconscious, those memories, right? So there's a huge part of you, the subconscious. So these trail of techniques work on you at the subconscious and the conscious level in order for you to be able to achieve the things that you want to achieve, right? They say that the methodology used throughout is modeling. Modeling is a way of replicating excellence, right? Often called a psychology of excellence. Modeling is about discovering and taking on the beliefs, values, behaviors, mental sequencing found in people who are excellent in what they do, so that you are able to utilize these ways for yourself and to teach others. Right, so we talked a little bit about what NLP is. Let us just look at what the application can be. What is it used for? Well, frankly, NLP can be used in anything in life. Why? Because anything in life is experienced by and is done by people. People are a mixture of their conscious and their subconscious. They experience things through vision, through sound, through feelings, taste and smell, and they're interacting with each other. And as we've talked about, you learn things, you experience things, and you create a map or a model of the world. Okay? You create your own view about what the world means to you. Because there are no absolutes. There's no absolute. People don't agree on everything. We know that from the polarization of politics and all sorts of things that happen in the world. Right, so everybody has their own mental map, their own view that they've created and constructed as they've grown. So everything that has to do with human interaction and what humans are trying to achieve can be influenced by and can be positively benefited by neuro-linguistic programming. A couple of examples here. In business, you use it to manage people. You can use it in sales. That's what I spend quite a lot of my life doing, is I work with salespeople, sales management, to enable them to be better at interacting with each other, at working out how to give the best value to their customers, how to interact with their customers, build relationships, get better sales results, and all of those sorts of things. You can use it in customer service, right? So again, that's interacting with people. It's working out how to get the best out of yourself for and on behalf of your customers. Negotiating. If you know how other people think and you are trying to find the best things for them in a win-win situation, then you can apply neuro-linguistic programming to help you to be a much better, more effective negotiator. Dealing and managing with conflict, there's teamwork, there's confidence, presentation skills, leadership. Coming back to presentation skills, right? Many people have a limiting belief and have made a limiting decision about the fact that they just can't do public speaking. Well, do you know what? If you're presenting to more than just one other person, you are public speaking. So, people think they can't do it, but actually they can. And there's a real skill and a real art in how you communicate your message, because presenting is not just reading off the slides. All right, I spent so many years working at Orange, at France Telecom, where the slides would get put up, and members of the French team would literally just read word for word, and you'd be like, oh my God, I'm just so bored. Actually, we're going to have a podcast around avoiding meetings at some point in the future, because they are just such a big waste and drain of your time. But communicating is what NLP helps you to do. Because if you understand how other people think, what the patterns are that they have, then you can work out how to better frame what you're saying so that you can get the most impact for them and for yourself. Right, then there's coaching. I do a lot of coaching with a lot of people, particularly coaching people who are stuck in a particular thinking pattern and then working out how to get them past that. I also do a lot of coaching of salespeople who are moving to become sales managers. Totally different thing. You think, oh, I'll take the best salesperson I have and I'll make them into a sales manager because they're the best salesperson. And what do? You create somebody who was the best salesperson who's no longer the best salesperson because they're now trying to grapple with managing a team that they're totally ill-equipped to do because they've never had any formal training and they've not had coaching. So I spend quite a lot of time trying to make sure that we turn salespeople into amazing sales managers. How? By coaching them to work out how their people think, and how each of the individual people think in each individual way, and how to get the best out of them and the best out of themselves so that everybody wins. So coaching can also be about setting outcomes, about feeling confident, overcoming limitations. I've talked about that a few times just now, breaking down the barriers to success. Then there's education and sport. Teaching. Teachers are amazing. They are the people that mould and fashion our children to become the people that they are. And whether they know it or not, whether it's dressed up as NLP or not, they will be using some NLP techniques in the way that they teach the children at schools, at universities, etc. It can be enormously powerful to get the most out of people, to really understand them, and therefore to present it in a way that they're going to get the best from it. Then there are things like health. Health benefits are overcoming illnesses, things like weight loss and anxiety, depression, as long as it's not clinical and really needs to go and be referred to a doctor. Stress, huge amounts of stress that people have, particularly in this kind of COVID world. People have been trying to cope with working at home, homeschooling, loved ones, the fear of whether or not it's going to affect them or their loved ones, etc. People are under a huge amount of stress. And NLP really helps to reframe, to reset, to enable them to think in different ways and to actually reduce the stress. It doesn't take away any of the things that are happening, but what it does is it enables them to change their response to the things that are happening out there. Okay, so also, a big one, stopping smoking. People find it quite hard, but NLP and the hypnosis aspect of NLP, because hypnotherapy and hypnosis is one of the tools that's been modelled, that's that trail of techniques that can be used to help people in that area. Right, so lots of things can be used to help them. So how did NLP grow up? What happened? How did it become? So I talked about the fact that you had Bandler, Grindler and Puslik that started this. Now, Bandler was a programmer. He was also a therapist, and he'd studied Gestalt therapy. Grinder was a linguist. So if you think about that, you've got a linguist, linguistic, programming, and then neuro, because this was all about how the brain worked and the programming. That's why it's got that slightly clumsy title, NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. They looked at a whole load of things that were happening at the time. This all started around the 1970s, the human potential movement in California. There were people that were looking at ecology, people like Bateson and Haley. Bandler and Grinder started by putting together a book called The Structure of Magic. There were actually 2 volumes of that, which was all about synesthesia patterns. where they started to look at how you can get really specific in your language and how that enabled people to think and to be programmed and to ultimately enabled them to be helped to change. So it was all about the specificity of the language that was being used. Well, then they started to look at Milton Erickson. And Milton Erickson was hypnosis, hypnotherapy, and he was having amazing success helping change the way that clients were reacting and behaving and believing in things and beliefs and phobias and all those sorts of things. But he was doing it by being incredibly vague. So totally vague language. And so they created or wrote a new book which was called Patterns 1 and 2. And this was about being very vague, and there's this thing called embedded commands. So as you talk in a very vague way, you can effectively embed commands which go straight into your subconscious and changes the way your subconscious thinks. So think about it this way, right? The structure of magic, it was talking about being very specific, and it's the conscious brain looks at the specific things and it can handle those. But the subconscious part of the brain, the much bigger part of you, actually responds to very vague, artfully vague language and those embedded commands. So that was very interesting. The next thing was they started to look at eye patterns. Now there's been quite a lot that's been written about eye patterns. So basically what this is it you can effectively see what the preference is in the way that people store memories or think about things by the way that their eyes move. So if you ask somebody a question and you are looking at them and they are normally organised, because not everybody is 100% the same, but they're normally organised, which is the most people out there, and you ask them a question, and if their eyes go up and to the right as you look at them, then that indicates that they are recalling something visually. If they look to the side, to the right, it indicates that they're recalling something auditorily, so they're hearing it before they give it out. And then there are various other parts of the patterns around there, kinesthetic, and then there's internal dialogue, and then whether ideas, pictures, sounds are constructed before they answer. Now this can be really important because you can look at and find out the preferences and the way that that people actually make decisions. And if you can know that, then you can lead them through that in order to change the way that they think about things or the decisions that they make. Right? Now there's been lots and lots of bad press about NLP and visual accessing cues or eye accessing cues. You can just Google it. And people say, oh, it's rubbish, it doesn't work, it's based on nothing. And the reason why that is because someone in their infinite wisdom at some point decided that you could look at eye accessing cues and you could tell if somebody was lying or telling the truth. Because obviously, if their eyes go up to visually remember, well, it therefore happened and it's true. But if their eyes go up to visually constructed, well, then they're lying. And I think it was some police department decided that this was a great thing to do and to use. And then in teaching sphere, they also started to use it. And it's, it's just, it's crap. It's rubbish, right? You cannot tell whether somebody is lying or telling the truth by this. This is simply indicating how they are bringing the information from the subconscious to the conscious. Okay, so if you ask somebody a hypothetical question, the chances are they are going to go to a place of visually or auditorily constructing the answer because they haven't experienced it. Whereas if you ask them to, how did you, what did you see on your holiday last year? Well, would have been 2019, not 2020 because of COVID, but whenever they went on holiday, what did you see? Chances are their eyes are going to go up and to the visually remembered space. Okay, it doesn't tell you whether you're lying or whether you're telling the truth. It just gives an indication as to how somebody accesses the information that is in their subconscious. It's a fascinating area, because if you really understand this, then you can work out how a person thinks, and then from a therapeutic perspective, you can lead them to change their thinking patterns, and you can anchor different responses and stuff like that. So it's really, really interesting. Bandler and Grinder wrote a book called Frogs into Princes. I recommend reading that book. In my book, Accelerate Personal Performance, it was the very first book that I read on NLP when I was probably about 17 years old or something like that. I just found it absolutely fascinating. Then they looked at Pavlov and the behavioral psychology and the strategies that people use. And, everybody's heard of Pavlov's dogs, effectively getting the dogs to salivate just by ringing the bell when there isn't any food on offer, because that's what they've been conditioned to do, right? Thereby proving that the brain gets conditioned and programmed to work in particular ways and to think in particular ways. So then they looked at this whole area of strategies, and that was written up in NLP Volume 1. Then there was this whole concept of reframing. I've talked about reframing in a past podcast. I'll talk about it, no doubt, in another one. I talk about it extensively in my course and in my book, because it is an incredibly powerful way of being able to get people to think about things in a different way. And it's interesting because if people have got a fixed pattern of the way they think, and then you reframe it, you're reframing it by getting them to think in a different way. You can actually do that in quite an artfully vague way, or you can be quite specific. You can utilize two different types of the techniques there, from what they call the meta model, which is being very specific, and the Milton model, which is effectively being very, very vague. Right, so then you come into an area where they start to explore submodalities. And in a book called Using Your Brain for a Change, and another one called Magic in Action, this is all about language patterns and how language is used to indicate the submodalities that are used, which are if you think about these as kind of like the sub bullet points to the auditory, kinesthetic, visual, etc. Ways that people think about things. And then we come on to what is called timeline therapy. It's kind of NLP version 2.0, but it's been called timeline therapy, where its creator, a guy called Tad James, effectively he patented. He copyrighted this as something completely different, but it is effectively a continuation, an evolution of NLP. And I'm certified in timeline therapy and also hypnotherapy and also NLP, and use these techniques with my clients, and they are incredibly powerful, just incredibly powerful. So that is a whistle-stop tour on what is NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. I hope you found it useful, and if you want to know more about it, please do get in touch with me. You can find me on my website, accelerate-performance.com. Send me a message. If you're interested in having a session to look at things like anxieties, or in the work environment, or limiting beliefs, limiting decisions, those sorts of things, and how I might be able to help you, let me know, and we can talk about it there. Actually, on the website, you can click and you can have a free 15-minute chat. We can talk about it. What are you experiencing? How might NLP and the other trail of techniques be able to help you? So do get in touch. Hope this has been useful, and I look forward to speaking to you next time on the Focus Action Results podcast. I hope that was helpful for you today and you enjoyed listening to the Focus Action Results podcast. If it was either helpful or enjoyable, or heaven forbid both, please subscribe, leave feedback, share with friends and family, and tweet it loud with the hashtag Focus Action Results podcast.